right, I'm here with, I don't know, Ram Ranch enthusiast Joe McAtee.
Yeah, I like Rams Ranch enthusiast.
Yeah, I know. He's former editor for Turf Show Times, Red SB Nation, back when the Rams were in St. Louis, I think, right?
Oh, that's true. That's true. God, that sounds so old. You make it sound like history. Like the kind of thing that you would read,
back in the day.
The Brooklyn Dodgers. That sounds so weird.
Yeah. They played in a mythical land called Edward Jones Stadium.
It was one of those stadiums, like the old baseball stadiums, where the distances are all weird. It was a 163-yard football field, and the uprights were only 3 feet, between them. It was a weird old stadium in the old timey days.
I mean, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Rams football notwithstanding, I'm good. How about yourself?
Rams, I mean, they got 2 games going. That's not bad. No, I'm good, man. I'm good. All right, so we got a Thursday night football game. Short week. Everybody's hurt, and that sucks, I guess. And we got I don't know, man. The Rams always feel like I'm not comfortable with the Rams. I think it's because they always
vibe, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Yeah, let's. Why? Why is that? Talk about I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, there's a couple stuff going on. I mean, Thursday night football at SoFi is always kind of strange. It's one of those things where a lot of times you got traveling fan bases that use SoFi as an opportunity to kind of, demonstrate the strength of a fan base and really show up, especially with some of the rivalries that we got, obviously with the 49ers, but other teams that like to make sure that, Los Angeles as a destination can be something where fan bases can show out, and obviously Thursday night football. But you combine it with the injuries and the way that the Rams have been playing, it's just an uncomfortable kind of situation. Then obviously for you guys coming off a loss and with the injuries you guys have got, it feels like the trajectory for neither is really going great. And I think that's probably kind of where the vibe's coming from.
Dope. Great. That's fantastic.
Yay.
So there's been, let's start by talking about Matthew Stafford. So there's been a weird, from my understanding, completely unsubstantiated rumor. I've not seen a source, except for, I guess, Mike Florio, which we all know doesn't count, say that the Vikings inquired about trading for Matthew Stafford. You heard about this?
I guess I've seen it on the internet, but it's one of those things where every now and then you got to be reminded that the internet is not real and that it's not for human activity. It's one of those things where, you see a rumor and then it's 100% not true. And it's like, man, what are we even doing here? But I've seen the rumors. I think that you're going to get a lot of that for the Rams with Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to the trading deadline, if only because.
Well, the Cooper Kupp stuff seems more real, right? The Stafford stuff is imagined to me.
Yeah, and the Kupp one had some, some bylines behind it. I know Jordan Rodrigue, who covers the Rams side of The Athletic, was mentioned as one of them, but there was a couple other people I saw that had it officially scooped. But I think it's just,
that one has like details, like who's going to take on like what parts of the kind. So that feels like more substantial.
And the salary cap considerations to try to get a decent, pick to come back as part of the return. I think it's really just a bigger reflection of the larger scale trajectory where the Rams, had the F them picks era, win the Super Bowl, and spent all that.
And now they're paying for it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so now you're kind of in a seller's market starting the rebuild, which I think is going well and going really quickly. But I still think it's the case that you've got, particularly with Stafford and Kupp, 2 remnants from that last era that are still kind of at least good enough to offer something if they're still not maybe the guys they once were.
So how has Stafford been? Because it felt like at the beginning of the year, everyone was like, oh, man. Because so in the offseason, we had a couple of players come out and be like, you all don't realize Stafford is that dude. He rules. He's awesome. A bunch of players say that Stafford is like this really incredible quarterback. And eventually, like, we got the understanding that maybe he's like been underrated his whole career, which like any Lions fans listening would be like, we haven't told you. Right. But, and obviously, he's got that Super Bowl now, which led up to some satirical discussions about his Hall of Fame case. Whatever, that was fun. But it seems like that the first couple of games, people were like, oh, this is real. This guy rules. And then, that is not the case anymore. We're not talking about it. The Rams have 2 wins. One of them was against this like hapless Raiders team that like just made a quarterback change and then had to go back because of injury and traded away Devontae Adams. It's a whole deal. So no one's really counting it, which fair enough, I think, actually.
Right.
But how is through all of that? I don't care about the wins and losses. How has Stafford been playing?
He's been playing pretty well overall. I think, obviously you get hamstrung by losing Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua to injury. For this offensive roster, that's going to take a ton off of what you can do as a quarterback, throwing to Tutu Atwell and some of the other guys we've got. I think part of it, too, was just he played so well last year overall, had a great 23 season. He had, he had more than 0 MVP votes. You know what I mean? So it's just a reflection of how good he was last year. And then to come into this year and the offensive line injuries that we had. Steve Avila, our second round pick last year, who had a really good rookie season. And then Jonah Jackson, who we had signed in free agency from Detroit, both injured as soon as we got going. So I think it's just been, the injuries on offense have really, and you got Matthew Stafford as I was going to say as a veteran guy, but he's way beyond veteran because he's played 3 NFL careers at this point. You know what I mean?
He's a veteran.
Yeah. So you know that he's got enough wisdom and kind of savvy on top of the physical gifts, the weird arm angles and some of the flicking motions and kind of the different way he gets the ball to kind of, it's not even defying physics. It's just weird physics throws that he can do. I just think, when you've got that many highlights in the kind of season he did, it's always going to feel disappointing having a start to the season like this. But it's hardly on him. It's hardly on McVay. It's a more comprehensive issue. And obviously coming out of that era we talked about, the Rams are kind of underinvested on their roster on both sides. I think this is kind of a reflection of that when you get those injuries on top of it.
Yeah, that all kind of tracks. If he were in kind of a more ideal environment, like let's say, the Vikings are a really fantastic environment for a quarterback to thrive in. Do you think he'd be getting MVP buzz just with the way that he's played?
I think so.
Thus far. Okay, yeah. Fair enough.
I think he could be. And the numbers would certainly be better. The numbers aren't necessarily horrible. He's had some rough interceptions, but the bigger issue is just the overall consistency of the offense is not where it was. It's not the quarterback play. It's Stafford. He's still fantastic. And like you said, if you put him in a better offensive situation, he'd be looking fantastic. There's no doubt.
Is it a little bit odd? I know that this has just kind of been the nature of the backup quarterbacks throughout kind of the Rams tenure, but is it a little odd that it's like a bunch of dink and dunk West Coasters, and then like Matthew Stafford is like the starter, and it's like a totally different vibe of a guy. You got like Garoppolo and Bennett. Is that?
And that's always been the case with quarterbacks under McVay. It's really weird. Even when we had Jared Goff, a classic pocket passer. I always used to call it giraffe mode when he would break out on some random QB, not even a sneak, but just trying to pick up a first down. And then our backups were more mobile guys, dual threat guys. It's always been a weird case where he's had these starters that don't match the backups. Of course, this year was even weirder because you had last year draft Stetson Bennett after winning 2 championships and the name recognition that brings, and then had some off-field issues, walked away from the team, came back for this offseason. But then the Rams brought in Jimmy G as the primary backup, and then he has to miss the first couple of games due to, suspension. Is one of those things where the Rams have always had a weird issue going on with backup quarterbacks under McVay. They really haven't had a solid investment there since a guy you guys might remember, in fact.
Yeah, man. So with all of that, like, do you think that, I don't want to talk about like trade talks, but do you think like if Matthew Stafford gets hurt, that's just it? Is it already over?
It's closer to already over than anything, but I wouldn't even frame it like that. I would frame it more just like, you go into different seasons with different kinds of expectations, and I don't think it would have been fair to have, sincere competitive aspirations for this team, given how much we had to invest in that Super Bowl roster and the fact that we're still just getting out from under it. This was the first season, this 24 draft was the first draft we've spent a first round pick since 2016. So you've just got this giant bubble kind of working its way through the roster timeline. So I guess I'd say it was closer to already over than not anyway. But obviously with the quarterback position being as important as it is and the talent that we've got there, and obviously the drop-off to Jimmy G and Stetson Bennett, sure, if Matt Stafford's going to miss time, or if we trade him and don't really get a sincere franchise quarterback back in return, then yeah, that's probably going to push things towards people looking at mock drafts in late October, early November, more so than usual for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so let's talk about this running back group. That looks better than I thought. I was not the biggest Kyren Williams guy. That's on me, L. But I did think Blake Corum would get more touches. Yeah. And at the beginning of the season, it seems like he was like the third running back, right?
Correct.
What is the deal with that running back split?
Yeah, it's been weird. You get a guy like Kyren Williams in the 5th round in 22, and by last year he's kind of breaking out behind an improved offensive line, and you think, okay, at least we've got the talent at running back to not have to worry about it. And then you spend a 3rd round pick on a running back in in the anti-running back movement era that's kind of going on. It was a really strange pick at the time, and obviously, given how little he's played and how many carries he's had, it's even weirder now. Obviously, it's a 4-year contract. It's a 4-year pick, but certainly the early returns are a bit underwhelming, I guess I'd say. I think overall, it's one of those things where McVay's always had a weird relationship with running backs. He's got a high priority on protection. Maybe there's something there that he liked from Ronnie Rivers last year that started the season with him as the primary number 2. It's a strong running back room. I think the question is, how are you going to balance that against the pass? And that's always been an issue for McVay strategically.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin O'Connell, same thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, I think we all kind of know that outside of the quarterback, the real stars, the receiver group, which obviously got hurt a fair amount, but you know, you had Puka Nacua have one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen from a receiver, much less one outside of the first round.
Sure.
Really fantastic. Slotted in to where Cooper Kupp played when Kupp was injured, and like where they lined up, the route tree looked basically identical. Kupp comes back, and I thought there would be kind of a little bit of not conflict, but you know,
Sure.
You'd see Nacua kind of step back because, you know, you can't have both of them do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And they were both very good at that. And it turns out it didn't really seem like that was the case. I mean, obviously his numbers dipped, but his performance was really there. And then you enter a period where like neither of them are healthy this year. Kupp comes back. Nacua, I think, was he designated for return? So he's gonna come back soon.
They got him listed as questionable. I wouldn't expect him on Thursday.
Yeah, it'd be a Thursday game, right? So yeah. You know, fantasy guys are getting teased by the prospect of Jordan Whittington. And then you got like Tutu, who like occasionally shows up big and then occasionally doesn't. How would you describe the state of, you know, what has been kind of the engine of this offense for a long time?
Yeah, maybe to be determined. I mean, it's one of those things where, like you mentioned, Tutu Atwell, second-round pick back in 21. This is contract year and is still kind of a bit player with a really intriguing skill set, but hasn't found kind of a consistent opportunity under McVay. A lot of people thought he was kind of replacing the role that Tavon Austin had, but it's much different. And Tavon Austin was only on the team that first year that McVay took over. Wasn't really a core part of his offense, whereas Tutu's been a core part, just hasn't been really worked in as much. You mentioned Jordan Whittington. You know, there's always going to be a rookie, even in a year where you don't take a wide receiver before the 6th round. When you get that guy, and the fan base falls in love with the preseason hype train. But I think it's one of those things where you got to get Cooper Kupp and Puka back on the field, and then kind of see with DeMarcus Robinson, another X factor there, how this is going to work out moving forward. Especially if you're talking about a 25 season without Cooper Kupp, you got to start figuring out some of these pieces. You know, is Atwell going to get an extension from the team, or would he leave in free agency? What kind of investment do they need to make immediately? Let's say for 25, let alone down the line. It's going to be really interesting to see how they turn that over. It was one of those things where they solidified it so early with the McVay-Snead partnership. Remember, year one was drafting Cooper Kupp. They already had Josh Reynolds, and then signed Robert Woods in free agency, brought over Sammy Watkins right before the preseason wrapped up. And so you had this immediate core group that was already, 100% 180 from the Fisher era. And obviously went from Sammy Watkins to Brandon Cooks within a year. But yeah, it's always been that stalwart of the offense to have these guys that Stafford can operate with. Got Puka Nacua kind of, the lucky chance by fate's time in the draft to go with Cooper Kupp. And like you said, similar skill sets, but I think they're going to need another investment. And I think they're just going to have to see if any of these guys is worth sticking around. I'm not sure. It's an interesting group. There's a lot to like there, but if the Rams are going to be more competitive, especially if you've got a new quarterback that is going to have to form some new chemistry, I think it's going to be interesting to see what this wide receiver group looks like throughout the year. Because to this point, obviously without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, it's just not strong enough for sure.
Yeah, it felt like, specifically this year, it would have been, I mean, obviously every year it's great to have all of your good guys healthy, but it seems like with the weakness of that offensive line, the ability to have guys who are really good at quick strike style offenses, which, I mean, Kupp and Nacua are just astounding at that kind of stuff. It really feels like building a weakness on a weakness, right? When they get hurt and the offensive line is just not there, that you'd solve one with the other or something like that. Yep. And you can't. How has that offense kind of attempted to adapt without having, full strength at receiver and full strength at the offensive line at the same time?
Yeah, I think they've worked some mid-range stuff, not a ton that's deep, because like you said, early on in the season, the offensive line play was just so poor. You couldn't really work any deep concepts, especially that game against Arizona. everything got condensed. Like you mentioned, you were doing some quick strike stuff, but a lot of it, they were able to swarm bodies because they knew so much of it was coming in. The run wasn't a threat where you couldn't work any runs off of those schemes, any delayed runs. And obviously you didn't have a screen game to work off of that because the runs weren't working. So it's just one of those things that's a little more comprehensive. That first game was really good against Detroit. That was the game that went to overtime. But since then, I think they've been trying to find some footing by going through some mid-route stuff, and they've got a little bit of success there. That's where Tutu obviously is special in terms of his skill set, but definitely haven't seen enough out of Demarcus Robinson. And the other kind of thing we never talk about with the Rams is tight end play. There's just almost nothing there that really contributes in a meaningful way outside of what Higbee's given the team over the last, 7-8 years. So overall, it's a pretty truncated offense. I think you guys will see that on Thursday. It's not very explosive. As good as Matt Stafford is, and obviously as good as Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are, those other guys, there's just not enough dynamism to really threaten teams deep, and there's too many bodies underneath, and you guys are going to put probably 7-8 in the box pretty early and kind of flood those things to snuff out those quick slants and those kind of stuff because it's too easy to do, and then obviously there's just not a ton that the Rams can do otherwise.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my question. Like, I do want to go over the individual offensive linemen, but before that, I mean, it's a Brian Flores matchup, and I mean, the guy wasn't great against the Lions, or the defense wasn't great against the Lions, but every Shanahan defense they've gone up against, like, period, has been kind of eviscerated. Like, is it just, I mean, like, obviously the offensive line is weak now. What is it about, kind of the way the McVay style offense, or the McVay offense very specifically in this case, operates that leaves us susceptible to this kind of blitz heavy quarters look?
Yeah, I think we're kind of in between running eras because you had that heavy zone running era with Todd Gurley, and that was obviously incredibly productive. And then the play action that got built off of that was just insane. And that was the 2018 Super Bowl season and kind of the couple seasons thereafter. But since then, there's been a lot of different looks. There was a lot of pistol work that he worked in last year. I don't know if you listened to the Playmakers podcast by Jordan Rodri, but she's talked to a lot of the architects and spoken specifically about the Rams running game and how it's kind of an evolution. I think part of that was last year with Kyron taking the job full time. And then Kevin Dotson, who we had brought over from the Steelers in free agency, was a really good addition last year. Waiting for Jonah Jackson to get involved and Steve Avila to come back to see if that interior offensive line is maybe going to be talented enough to kind of lean into that and maybe do some different running work. But right now it's a little scattershot and it's only Kyron. And, like we mentioned, there hasn't been much Blake Corum whatsoever. I think he's up to 15 carries total on the year. And I think, 5 of them were last game. So it's really just Kyron kind of working some stretch work and trying to get some third down opportunities because without Cooper Kupp and Puka, you've been so hamstrung anyway. Just not very explosive and certainly not in the running game either. But that, when you're under investing in the offensive line, particularly a left tackle, you're kind of taking in the requirement to be a little bit more conservative and to be a little bit more condensed and just try to be more successful. There's plenty of successful NFL teams that operate like that, but you're right. That's not normally how the Rams have operated and certainly what they're going to want to get back to in the coming years for sure.
So let's talk about that left tackle. Is it Alaric Jackson?
It is. For now, he missed some time, and we had gone with a couple other guys, and obviously Noboom's hurt again, but it'll be Alaric Jackson again at left tackle. He's interesting. He was really good in college at Iowa. He played with Wirfs from Tampa Bay. Really good combo, and he was actually a better prospect for a long time in college. But last couple years, his stock kind of fell. I was surprised he fell all the way out the draft. He's been a solid addition, but I think the Rams are going to have a tough decision this offseason whether or not they kind of want to stick with him and see if they can invest in other areas of the roster or if, when you make this big of an interior offensive line investment as they did this last offseason, maybe you go over the top with another left tackle in advance of a quarterback change. I think there's a lot they're going to have to figure out going into this offseason. That's going to be one of the big ones just as much as some of the other ones we already discussed.
Okay, and at the guard positions, you mentioned Kevin Dotson. I think was it Logan Bruss over at the left guard position?
It's been a lot of rotation. So that's where Jonah Jackson was supposed to play. That's where Avila actually played last year, but they kicked Avila inside to center with the idea that Jackson would go into left guard. So we've had a couple different guys that have gotten snaps there. We've gone through a couple. Bruss is actually, getting benched somewhat predictably, but yeah, the injuries have kind of made that a swing and door position for a couple of different guys. And that's part of what's affected the run game too, right? Is that you're going week to week with different bodies there and then trying to figure out what you can do kind of on the fly versus knowing those kind of things when you've got your number one guys in there.
So if it's not Bruss, who is it?
So we've got a couple options. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they make it a little game time surprise. We'll have to see. I know the one guy they talked about is Justin Deddick. He's one of our UDFA's rookies. Obviously hasn't played, so we'll have to see. I know he got some time in the preseason, but you know how preseason football doesn't really carry over. So we'll have to see. I think he'd probably be the most obvious candidate, but Bo Limmer could probably slide over. He's a 6th round pick out of Arkansas. Maybe he's an option. Yeah. We'll have to see, man. It's one of those things where, you start getting 2, 3, 4 injuries deep and you start having to coming up with new answers that you didn't even know were possible answers in the first place,
Right. I like Bo Limmer a lot coming out of college. I was surprised he fell to the 6th round. But 6th round center playing guard, probably not great.
Yeah.
So,
answers that you didn't know were answers, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. And then at right tackle, I mean, that's fine, right? There you go. That's a guy.
We love Big Rob, man. I think the question is, how much longer does he have? He's been around since what? I think 15 was his draft year. Yeah. So, 10 years in. Love Big Rob, and he's obviously been a glue guy for a long time. The question is, how much does he factor in your future plans? In terms of this week, yeah, he's still a component that you can rely on. He's not a Pro Bowl guy, he's not that dynamic, but he's been super reliable. He's been a fan favorite for a long time. He's a quiet, he's that classic lunch pail guy. Doesn't do interviews, doesn't like media, but glue guy that you got to have a successful team. And so it kind of sucks that he's had to been through the early Fisher years where things were not good, and then into the McVay success area, and now kind of into this rebuild where you feel that maybe his peaked with the team, but he's still a guy that's definitely going to give you some football throughout the season. I think the question will be how much more he's got after this year. That's all.
Yeah. And I mean, I like him a lot, but it feels like you're probably in a bad spot if he's your best offensive line. It feels like that's not a wonderful situation to be in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real issue with the injuries, right? Is that our best should have been probably Steve Avila or Jonah Jackson, and they just haven't been able to play. But yeah, no doubt. And I think the question will be, you mentioned wide receiver. We talked about left tackle, right tackle, and then you got cornerback. I think when you start talking about Rams' 1st round pick, it's almost certain to be one of those. I know some people have issues with safety and linebacker, but when you got left tackle, wide receiver, cornerback on your draft need board, those tend to be a little bit higher, yeah.
All right. That gives us a pretty good look into that offense. I mean, it very much seems like if you're Brian Flores, you're probably designing some stunts and twists to attack the left side of that line. It feels like that's just an obvious thing that you would do.
Oh, there's so much y'all can do. I mean, and that's the thing is it's Flores, so it's going to be relentless, especially the game that y'all had against the 49ers, right? I don't like the way this sets up for the Rams whatsoever, but that's the nature of the beast and the rosters that we got and the coaches that we got. It is what it is. You got to remember, this is a old school, philosophy that McVay picked up from Shanahan, the parent, and has been running with a while. So there's so many variations of it that you guys have seen all of them before. There's not a ton that McVay is going to do that's really going to innovate. You know what I mean? Versus just doing it better.
Yeah, fair enough. So defensive side of the ball, you've got the guy who should have won Defensive Player of the Year, Kobe Turner. And you've got sorry, I felt kind of strongly about that, but yeah, it's fine. Jalen Carter's good. It's fine. And you got Byron Young, who I thought played better than I would have expected last year. Braden Fisk, I actually was not a huge fan of that pick, but whatever. He's there. You've got Jared Verse. He's there. Super, super young defensive line to start. How do you feel about that group? Because young doesn't mean good, but it doesn't mean that the inexperience is going to hurt them either. How's that shaping up?
Trajectory looks good. I mean, you mentioned the front in particular. You got your 2 rookies from last year, your 2 rookies from this year, and all 4 of them look to be solid. Verse, obviously, 1st round pick, looks like a stud. I mean, it's early in his career, but he's just getting a ton of pressure. There's been some concern among some Rams fans at finishing sacks off. But, we've played Caleb Williams. We've played Kyler Murray. We've played enough quarterbacks where those are the kind of things that are, statistical anomalies versus – when you get into some of the meat of this schedule and you're going to get some less mobile quarterbacks, those things will end up evening out. But yeah, Versus looked fantastic. I think the question is going to be the guys behind them. And it's one of those things where the Rams just haven't had an opportunity to invest there yet since the FM Picks era, unless they had done something different than they have. And I think the fact that so many people are comfortable with the decisions they've made the last 2 off seasons, they just need some time to address those. But yeah, the front looks really good. Ton of promise. And obviously you're going to be together for the next 2 seasons after this on the rookie deal. So definitely like where that's headed. I think the question mark behind them is so huge, though. That's really where Rams fans are concerned.
How have like Fisk and Verse looked? It sounded like Fisk is coming off of like a really excellent game, or it was
Yeah.
2 weeks ago or something like that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's had a couple of solid performances. And obviously, I mean, the big thing when you start talking about the front isn't the guys who are there, it's the guy who's not, right? Aaron Donald.
Yeah. Yep.
How do you make up for that? And obviously, you go a little bit overboard in taking an edge in the first round and his teammate defensive tackle that you trade up for in the second. But that's the kind of thing you have to do to try to make up for it. I don't think it necessarily has, but I don't know that was the intent either versus, stocking up a lot of talent and investment in a really necessary group to start turning over the defense from the Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey led one to a defense that's going to include neither of them. But yeah, definitely up front. Got to like what Fisk is doing. Jared Verse, like I said, has been absolutely fantastic. A little bit of concern for Cam Curl behind him, safety that we had added into the mix. But I think overall, everybody likes where things are going up front for sure.
Cool.
Not Cam Curl, wrong Cam. Cam Kitchen. Sorry, I'm getting my cams mixed up.
No worries. Ton of cams to be confused with. The linebacker situation. I mean, the Rams have always kind of underinvested. Is maybe the most generous description I could give for how they've treated the linebacker position. I don't know how much that's really hurt them because it feels like there has been an analytics movement to suggest that linebackers just matter a lot less than your secondary and your defensive linemen, and they've embraced that wholeheartedly. But with that in mind, I think the entire linebacker. Now I'm looking at it. I think they're all undrafted.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, the main reason why is because we traded Ernest Jones before the season, obviously making headlines this week, going from the Titans back to the NFC West in Seattle. That was kind of more the odd approach than anything, because like you mentioned, we've gotten by on some lower investments, Micah Kaiser for a while, and then Ernest Jones, and trying to plug that position with lower investments. But obviously, the guys that we got in there are not terribly skilled, athletically limited for sure. Although a lot of people want to see Omar Spates, LSU guy, and see him get some time. But a part of that is the grass always being greener. When your linebackers aren't playing well, you're going to start looking on the depth chart for any option. But like you mentioned, it's just been underinvested, and sometimes you get what you pay for. And of course, if you haven't paid much, you're not going to get much. So it's definitely a hole on the defense that teams are attacking with, aplomb, with ease, with regularity. And I don't see that changing until the Rams figure out something. They're going to have to overload something there with some safety work. Like I mentioned, haven't gotten as much out of Kitchens as we would have wanted as a rookie third-round pick. Cam Curl came in, was hopefully going to contribute a little bit more. We got him from Washington as a free agent in the offseason, but the cornerbacks, especially because they're on an island as well, and we don't have enough talent there and some injuries there. You just got too much going on back there, and the Rams just haven't been successful as a unit behind that front at all.
Does the John Johnson injury play a role in that, or was he not going to be important?
I mean, I would hope not. If John Johnson at this point in his career is that crucial to your defense has problems, but our defense has problems. So maybe. That was a guy 6 years ago that we were invested in trying to help us get to the Super Bowl and did. So, this is almost one of those where we brought back Eric Weddle, at the end when we were on a Super Bowl run. Or, you add a guy like that almost as much for what he does in the locker room than what he's going to necessarily do on the field, because you're not that invested in what's going on in the field that heavily anyway. So I'd like to think it's not that big a loss. Maybe it is simply because we're that thin in terms of the roster, but it's definitely not going to be a standout defense beyond that front. And even those guys, because they're so young and unknown for the most part, this is a pretty threadbare defense for sure at the back.
Because I remember, there was some optimism about Darius Williams, there was some optimism about Kobe Durant. I know Tre'Davious White's at the end of his career, so whatever. Sure. But people like to kill a Witherspoon for a hot second. Sure. How has the cornerback? Because you mentioned that they're overwhelmed. They're on an island. They're overwhelmed. But just generally speaking, how has that cornerback group looked?
Not great. I think the only real issue is that they're kind of being bumped one slot ahead of where they need it. You know what I mean? Where they should be. When Darius Williams was kind of that third cornerback, when we had Jalen Ramsey locking down one side of the offense, and then you could have Darius kind of as a slot guy, he was much more successful. But when you've got him as one of your starting edge cornerbacks, he's almost being put in a role that he's not designed to succeed in. Kobe Durant's coming off Defensive Player of the Week. Obviously, it's kind of hard to be critical of him. But over the course of the season, overall, it just hasn't been good. He's probably in a starting role that he doesn't need to be in, kind of a thing. But it's one of those where and obviously every team gets better when you add a guy like Jalen Ramsey in his prime. But if we had somebody like that would bump everybody down, I think that's where you get some of those things where Darius Williams could be more successful in a different role, where Kobe Durant and Akello Witherspoon, where you wouldn't necessarily need Tre'Davious Wright, or even if you did, like you said, he's in there just to kind of coach the team through the week and get everybody ready for Sundays and those kind of things. But yeah, and you go to the nickel backs with Josh Wallace and even Charles Woods. There's just not a ton there, and people are kind of overextended. But I think that's less about them and more so about the timeline. I know I've referenced that a couple times. I think there's something that requires some professionalism from guys to know that. One of the things they talked about, I think it was 2 off seasons ago, and they were talking about underinvesting in linebackers specifically. Arif, was the idea that Les Snead coined it, the courage that you've got to have to take a unit like that into the regular season, knowing that you're not going to have the talent that you've got in the wide receiver room, or that you don't have the talent you got at the top of your quarterback depth chart. You're going to have units where you've got to kind of lean on guys to get through things. And this is definitely for this year, that unit that we're relying on in the secondary to kind of be underinvested, but find a way to get through it. It's been pretty ugly. I'm not going to lie so far. And maybe that's to be expected, but we're just going to have to see if they're not able to step up, then it's probably going to be another rough couple of months to finish this out for sure.
Sure.
I don't think it's a surprise most,
Right. Yeah. I remember in eras past, the Rams special teams unit was always a little bit interesting, a little bit fun. Johnny Hecker throwing some stuff. Sure. You've got all these trick plays up there. Now, you had Greg the Leg, right? Now, I don't know. No one's talking about it, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but certainly it's not an exciting thing.
Sure.
I remember I was talking to somebody who does a lot of research into like drafting kickers and stuff like that, which sounds like a boring life, but live your life, right? And I was talking to him and I was like, hey, so the Vikings draft Will Reichert. Like, what do you think of that? And he was like, terrible decision, which right now, of course, Will Reichert looks fantastic. Sure. And I asked him like who he thought the best kicker in the draft was, or if there was anyone worth drafting. I thought there was one. It was Joshua Carty. Yeah. How has he been performing?
He's been solid. I mean, he hasn't had a ton of longer opportunities. He's only kicked 150-yarder. He made it, but the offense has been so limited that we haven't gotten him a ton of opportunities. That hasn't really necessarily resulted in a ton of punts either for Ethan Evans. But it's one of those things where when you had Greg Zuerlein and Johnny Hecker for so long and as good as they were, not only could you do some of the facile trickery stuff that obviously you remember, but they were reliable in terms of boom and kicks, punts, and field goals. We've had so much turnover at those positions since then, and kind of going season to season to try to figure it out. Now this is Carty's first year, so you kind of got to settle it in for the long haul to see where he looks 2, 3, 4 years from now when hopefully the Rams are back in the playoffs consistently and competitively. But I think it's fine for now. It's not, if there were issues that I would rank in the team, the special teams performance wouldn't be in the top 8 for sure. Mm-hmm. So at least it's settled from a place kicker perspective. Maybe not the strongest leg in terms of punting, but if you're relying on punting skill to differentiate your team from others, you're in a pretty rough place.
I tell that to Chicago Bears.
Tell that to your friend who's out there studying kickers. Like you said, there's nowhere to go but up from there. Jeez.
Okay, I'm going to look up the Vegas line real quick to try and figure out kind of what people think about this game. All right, looks like Vikings.
Let me ask you, how would you define like Ryan Wright's performance this fall?
I mean,
he's deployed.
I guess disappointing, but not to the point where there's no action item here. It's like, I guess he could be playing better, right?
I was going to say, when you guys beat New York and going into the bye week 5-0, were you guys all upset and complaining about punting? I'm assuming for sure that'd be the number one talking point, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. That led all the headlines. It drove all the clicks for sure, right? That's how I got all my subscription signups.
What's the line you said?
Looks like it's most of them are Vikings -3, so we don't even have the half line, so we're pushing at 3. I mean, based off of our conversation and also your reaction to that information, you don't love that line. You probably are taking the Vikings.
I think so. I mean, I know obviously it's in Los Angeles, but we've seen tons of road favorites this year and tons of road favorites come to town and get a dub. So yeah, I don't know. I think the one thing I'd be looking for is how they come out in the first half. If this game is anywhere close, by halftime, I would expect you guys to pull away with it in the second half. I think we got to come out and do something in the first half to get some kind of 2-possession lead. Otherwise, there's just the talent differential. And to be honest, the talent differential plus the coaching, you guys' coaching staff is doing such a fantastic job this year that I expect things to be so clean on your side in the second half that Those are the kind of things I'd see the teams pulling away. And that's obviously what happened in a couple of games, especially those NFC North games that we had already against Chicago and Green Bay. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar template.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, man. I mean, do you even have stuff to plug? I mean, we just plugged you off the street. Like, I don't know if you create content.
Go vote.
How
about
vote.
that?
Yeah.
I'm plugging vote.
You're a DC guy, right?
I was. I moved from DC a couple of years ago. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area right now. I actually moved. I was right next to Cowboys headquarters for a while, but I couldn't take Jerry yelling at me in traffic while I drove by, so I moved.
You moved out.
Why is that man yelling at me from the street? I'm the best general manager. Just yelling at strangers. He's run out of people to yell at.
Well, I mean, we got the guy he was yelling at onto our podcast. Great get, I think. Hopefully you're not the guy that told Haslam to draft Johnny Manziel. Hopefully,
I was not
a different random guy on the street. Yeah, all right.
No, but
cool,
it was interesting as a Dallas guy that I grew up here in the Dallas area. I was the only Rams fan for a long time that I knew. I was born in Los Angeles, so this is the pre-St. Louis Rams, and I had never known any Rams fans in the Dallas area until 2018 when suddenly we made the Super Bowl, and I'm seeing Los Angeles Rams gear in Dallas-Fort Worth pop out of nowhere. It's like, where are these zombies coming from? What the hell? What evil have we awakened in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex? So it's been good to see a couple Rams fans out of nowhere in this area the last couple of years. But good Lord, a little bit bad for Cowboys fans because.
Well, Elon Musk led the way, right? There's an exodus from California to the great state of Texas. I think that's probably it. I think that's why
scary. That's scary that he's the model for that migration movement. Ugh. Give me anybody else. Give me anybody else. Good Lord.
All right. Do you want people to follow your Twitter? Do you want to bring it up, or should we just ignore that?
Follow me on Twitter for some Ram stuff, 3K_, but be aware that the Ram stuff this year is not that fun. We'll have fun with it, if only because it's there to be made fun of. But I mean, come on. You're going to go through and let's be honest. You go back to 2004 to 2016, those 13 seasons where the Rams didn't have a single winning year. If you can get through that, you can have fun with a year like this. I mean, here's the thing, Arif, and this is so funny. I don't know if we've ever talked about it. So after 2021 season, right? Go to the Super Bowl, win with Stafford, come back, try to run it back in 22. Things fall apart.
Yeah.
Immediately after, you could tell they went into rebuild mode, traded Jalen Ramsey for a 3rd round pick. Okay. Where you're just clearly letting him go to a contender and taking the lack of value in return. Cut Bobby Wagner, who had a really good season. You traded Allen Robinson. They had just signed him to a 3-year deal. It did not work. They moved him. And so immediately it was one of those things like, okay, this team is targeting a rebuild. Let's say it's going to take a couple of years. Let's call it Project 2025. And so for years,
no way, get out.
Rams fans, we were talking about Project 2025 and how it was going to undo the NFL establishment. I was going to throw these new rules, and then out of nowhere, this other Project 2025 starts getting referenced. We're like, wait, no, that's not at all what we're talking. We're talking about Rams football. What are you guys talking about?
Whoa. Why should we change our name? You're the one who sucks. What's going on here?
We're talking about getting rid of people who are crossing the line. Oh, you guys are talking about that too. Oh, okay, I know. No, so it's one of those things where, coming off FM picks and being realistic about it, it was going to take years to give the front office the time. I mean, think about the fact that we went over all the guys that they've added the last 2 seasons: Kevin Dotson, Puka Nacua, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, Steve Avila, and then the additions this year, Jonah Jackson. I mean, you mentioned Blake Corum, obviously, as a running back, but the main 2, Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, in 2 off seasons, they've put together a core pretty quickly, and a pretty good one that's got Puka Nacua on the offensive side and Verse on the defensive side. So it's not like they could have done more with what they had. They just haven't had the opportunity to get through the rebuild that quickly. And so I think that's the nature of where they're at. They're a team that's kind of stuck in between. They still got this really talented quarterback at the end of his career. You've got a fantastic wide receiver at the end of his career in Cooper Kupp. But the fact that he hasn't been on the field, Puka hasn't been on the field, you've had some offensive line injuries. It is what it is. We're kind of stuck in between the 2 eras, and that's never fun. But to the extent that we can have some fun on Twitter at 3K_, we'll do it.
Well, no, it's like, I know that we're at the end of the show, but now you've brought this up, I just feel like I have to mention this. Like, is it a rebuild if McVay just retires? What's the deal with that? Did he just like flirt with it for a second? Now no one's talking about it, or what?
He has been. Yeah, I think when he made the decision to come back, and he had reportedly an offer on the table from Amazon to join the Thursday night football / whatever Amazon is trying to build with their broadcasting arm. But the fact that he came back, I think, means that he had to make a sincere investment in a little bit longer term than just 23, 24.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we'll see those things every offseason just because he's so charismatic and he is great at speaking off the cuff that I think he'd do great in the role. But the fact that he came back, I think he's going to be around for a couple of years and give the front office time to kind of rebuild a core and go from there. It's going to take another season or two for sure at a minimum, but I'd expect him to be around. The question is going to be when he's around and Stafford and Kupp aren't here, what that looks like, and that I don't know.
All right, fair enough. All right, man. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it, man. We'll talk soon.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James McAtee. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.